Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
Hi there guys, it's Adam Martin here, and welcome back to another video. Time for another discussion. Today it's going to be centred around BBC News, because unfortunately, BBC News is hitting some pretty serious cuts. Now, this might not seem like anything too radically new. The BBC as a whole has been undergoing cuts for the past few years now, but particularly with its news service, these blows, I think, come thick and fast, and they hit pretty hard. Before we delve into it, I just want to say thank you to all of you supporting the videos recently. Hello to all the new subscribers, the new viewers. We do videos like this sometimes where we discuss a topic as well as the documentary stuff, so go and check out everything we've got to offer. It's all here on the channel in various playlists and stuff like that, and we're happy to have you aboard. So the main article is from the BBC themselves, and it reads, BBC News job losses aim to save £24 million. Now, to you and me, that is an incredible amount of money that we're never likely to see in our lifetimes, but 24 million in the context of television, in particular with the BBC, that is a lot of money, but it maybe isn't as much as some people thought, but we're going to break it down. Let's get into it. BBC News has announced cuts totalling £24 million as part of a wider BBC effort to save £700 million a year. So £700 million a year, 24 million here. That's not exactly a very large number. That is less than, doing quick maths in my head, that is less than 5% of what they need. Casualties include hard-hitting global interview programme HARDtalk, which is being axed. Its presenter, Stephen Sackur, who will leave the BBC, called the move depressing for the future of in-depth interviews that hold to account those who all too often avoid accountability in their own countries, and this is undoubtedly one of the biggest shames of these cuts. HARDtalk as a programme does exactly as Stephen says there. They focus on these, as the name implies, very in-depth, hard-talking interviews with people, not just from the UK, but sometimes from other countries as well, really trying to press them, holding them to account for their actions, what they may or may not have done, etc. Because in a lot of countries, the journalism there is highly restricted. So programs like HARDtalk, even though a lot of the time they're on overnight, you're not likely to catch them when they're live, but they are very important, and it really showed that the BBC, as an organisation, one that has to try and commit to being impartial, was really committed to delivering a program like HARDtalk, which was something quite different from what a lot of the other broadcasters did at the time when it launched, and still, do now. The bespoke Asian network news service will also close, with the station taking its bulletins from Radio 1's Newsbeat instead. That's the other thing that's going to suffer, whether it's the different language services or like local services as well. They're always going to be amongst the first to be hit by cuts. The proposals would result in a net loss of 155 jobs, with 130 journalism roles at risk and 25 from media operations. That's like technical roles like camera operators. The 24 million saved represents 4% of the corporation's news budget. So it is a saving, 4%, that's still a fair chunk, but people losing their jobs is never good. And we're going to talk more about how this is going to impact BBC News as a whole, or the corporation as a whole, in just a second. Let's continue on for now. Other changes include the production of the overnight programme on BBC Radio 5 Live moving to BBC's nations and local teams. The number of digital roles in time zones outside the UK will also be increased, with some roles in London closing and new positions opening in Sydney. The CEO of BBC News, Deborah Turnus, said even after the savings, the department will remain very well resourced compared to our competitors. Now, I think, if she's still saying that, that's great, but you can't help but think, with BBC News being chipped away like this, is it going to start to lose some of that uniqueness that it had over its competitors? It's always been said that BBC News does things in a very, as people say, BBC way, very different from the competition, very different from the competitors, and I'd argue that does hold true for the most part. But if we're losing programs like HARDtalk and other unique features as well, is it really going to be able to stand out as it once did? The National Union of Journalists said it was concerned about the long-term harm to the BBC without urgent investment. The NUJ General Secretary, Michelle Stanistreet, said, "These latest cuts represent a damaging assault on journalism and news at a time when the UK needs greater plurality and diversity of news, and trust in journalism is under attack at home and abroad." I mean, I'd be inclined to agree with them there, especially in the last 10 years, as the information age continues to roll on. We've got a lot of news that isn't true out there. We've got a lot of misinformation on various social platforms, even on various news sites across the world, ones that you could argue are state-controlled or have a heavy influence from their government. I'd argue we need the journalism that we see on BBC News a lot of the time to persist. It needs to cut through the noise. They have great tools like, say, BBC Verify. That's been a really useful thing for them to have under their belt, particularly when it comes to big conflicts and big claims are being made, such as various wars and things like that. It's also been a great way to fact-check politicians because believe me, they need the fact-checking. So the concerns here shared by the NUJ, I think, are totally valid, and it might just undermine things as a whole. The corporation did not include an announcement about the World Service, which has already seen cuts to foreign language services, including Chinese and Arabic. The BBC World Service, man, is such I think, a vital part of the BBC's DNA, providing its services to people around the world, and not just the locals. You got to think about all the Brits who live abroad because, they're everywhere. They need the BBC, or they can use the BBC even, to check in with what's going on at home and get the reliable news. You could argue it's maybe less valuable than it was 20, 30 years ago before the internet. The World Service on TV or radio would have been a great ally to expats that were living abroad, and they'd say, oh, well, now you can get it from the internet. But again, I think it comes back to that element of trust. Do you trust what you're reading on the internet? Because I know, I've grown up with the BBC, and just in my experience, here come the accusations of being a fanboy again, but I've seen news programs from ITV, Channel 4, etc., and they do a fine job, but I've always found it easiest to consume the news via the BBC and find their approach very accessible, and also, 9 times out of 10, quite trustworthy, which is higher than I could say for a lot of other news outlets out there, let me tell you. The government currently contributes about a quarter of the World Service's £366 million budget, and the BBC has asked for an increase. It's understood the decision will come by the end of October. Now, they might get this, we don't know. We know that the last government were very averse to giving the BBC any more money than it felt it needed, whereas this newer government, they're a bit more committed to the BBC. They still need to decide about the licence fee. There's that whole argument. But you could argue the current government we have now in the UK are a bit more BBC friendly, shall we say. As to whether or not they're going to give more money, I mean, we've heard it in the news a lot that things are going to be tightened, so it's not necessarily a guarantee. I mean, they already contribute 366 million, which is a lot of money to begin with. I suppose it depends how much more the BBC's asking for. They haven't included a figure there. I'm assuming it'll be at least tens of millions more to contribute, and as to whether the government will do that, well, it says we'll have to see come the end of October. On Monday, the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, warned that the UK is struggling to counter a rise in pure propaganda from countries like Russia and China because of cuts to the service. And propaganda is on the rise, and it's not just from Russia and China, it's from a whole magnitude of countries as well. And I'd argue, yes, the BBC, as well as all the other broadcasters out there like ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, etc., they are struggling with this sort of rise, particularly with social media and all the factors that can contribute as well. And, more cuts to BBC News ultimately don't surprise me, just because we know the corporation has been questing to save hundreds of millions of pounds for some time now. It really does need that further investment, but I worry that's not going to come until at least 2027, when we sort out the whole licence fee debacle. Because at the minute, that is still the main way the BBC is funded, by a licence fee. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people don't agree with it. It could be argued it's a very antiquated system for the 21st century, so we need to move to something else. Subscription may seem like the obvious one, but there are, of course, many logistical things about that as well for a corporation as large as the BBC. So they're trying to work out how on earth do we progress forward from 2027, if not via a licence fee. But I think until that's done, I just can't see great amounts of investment going into the corporation. Maybe money can help, like with the World Service, if the government contributes a bit more there. But aside from that, I think we're only going to coast at what we've got, or with more cuts coming down the line. So obviously HARDtalk was the main one there. Other BBC News shows have closed as well. In RXTV here, they've done an article talking about this subject as well, and they mention it's following other BBC News shows that have gone, like Dateline London, like Our World, and The Papers. And I actually quite enjoyed The Papers back in the day, if I managed to catch it. It also mentions it's been an unpopular decision with viewers and listeners. And then we've had a comment from Andrew Neil, who of course worked for the BBC for many years, but he's now with Times Radio. He's a very distinguished broadcaster. You either love him or you loathe him, but he's certainly carved out his place. He had a comment to say. He said, "It was very depressing indeed." He said, "The BBC seems determined to give up so much of what makes it special and to do more of what everyone else does." And I feel like this has been another classic BBC conundrum. It always wants to be unique. It always wants to give a take that is unique or present a program in a style that isn't done commonly by other broadcasters, if at all. But then when it comes to saving money, it's those programs that are often the first to go. And then I guess, as Andrew says, what remains falls in line with what a lot of the competition are doing. It diminishes the BBC-ness, if you like, as Martyn Lambinam would say.
It would have lost its BBC-ness.
Instead, the BBC's rolling television news channel is expected to fill the gaps created by the end of HARDtalk with extended news bulletins. The merged UK and international service already extended weekend news slots after Our World and Dateline London closed. Just to give that example, Our World's former 9:30 UK time slot in the evening at the weekends is now filled by an extended hour of rolling news from 9 p.m. And it's unclear how the World service will fill the gaps, with the cuts there, obviously. Yeah, extended news bulletins, I mean, they're great, as much as you want to learn more. But I think those programs slotted in within BBC News were vital as well. Things like HARDtalk, Dateline London, Our World, etc. It not only broke up the flow of just like pure news spouted at you for a bit, and it offered either unique insights, unique opinions. With HARDtalk, you really got those in-depth interviews that I'd argue, as mentioned, still need to happen. They're still very important. And it is a bit of a surprise and a shame that it is coming to an end. But I guess from a purely business standpoint, if you're on the BBC team or BBC News team, you're thinking, right, we've got to make cuts. We've got no other way. How are we going to do this? Something does have to go. And it seems that HARDtalk this time has been the victim of that, and it's a great shame. And now, what does this mean for the future of BBC News as a whole? Well, it's going to keep on trucking, as it always does. I feel like that's been its mantra ever since cuts were beginning to be introduced across the corporation as a whole. I think as long as its integrity remains, as long as that, that aspect of we're delivering our journalism here that is factual, that is important, that is truthful, that's been verified, etc. As long as they keep that up, then I think it will continue on to be as successful as it has been for decades now. But I really hope we don't lose more of these BBC News programs like HARDtalk, because if at the end of the day, if the channel is literally just going to become a 24-hour of rolling news, and that's it, one presenter or a mixture of presenters behind a desk rolling on, then it is going to lose some of its appeal. And I know that might sound counterproductive. You might say, Adam, it's a news channel. Like, of course, they're going to report the news. And yes, of course they are. But sometimes when the news is a bit slow, they don't have anything to report on. Those sort of programs like HARDtalk and all that, they were a nice breakup. It still was tied to news, but offered you something different. Hopefully, we won't see any more of these programs become acts, because then the BBC will really fall into being like a lot of the other competition that just offer rolling news channels of this manner. Just sad, man. Just sad. But I want to know your thoughts. What do you think about this in the comments? Do you think it was the right thing to get rid of HARDtalk, or do you think they could have saved by getting rid of some other programs on BBC News, or gone with a whole different tactic entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. That is all for this video, and thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please remember to leave a like, because it really does help us out. Subscribe to the channel as well. We'd love to have you aboard. And again, thank you to all the new subscribers. Welcome aboard. I hope you enjoy what you see here on the channel. In the meantime, I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.
Oh! I didn't know that bit was coming. Did we warn the health and safety people about that?
Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Bruce Danton, Derek Chambers, Shaun Knock, Daud Khan, Liam De-Maine, Ajmac 200017, Deck, Jen, Traffi, Tim Ripley, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Ted Elliott, Marnanel Thurman, John Wakefield, Kieran Bolton, 40-something Manchild, Jerry Ralph, John McLeod, Subs Khan, Saint Rocket 9, and James Wallace, our AMTV staff members.